Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UCS Defiance and watched the massive space station grow larger in the viewscreen. The structure was bigger than any human city and shaped like a crystal flower with dozens of petals reaching out into space. Each petal held ships from different alien races, and the center housed the grand tournament facilities where the galaxy's greatest military minds would compete. "First time seeing anything like this," said Lisa Park as she joined him at the observation window. She was the team's strategic analyst and had spent months studying alien military doctrine. Her datapad showed fleet formations and tactical patterns that made human warfare look like children playing with sticks. Sam Rodriguez walked up behind them carrying a chess set under his arm. He had been the world chess champion before joining. "The military is an advisor? Big place for playing games," he said while setting up his board on a nearby table. "Wonder if they know what they're getting into." The communication system crackled to life and an alien voice spoke in perfect English. "Human vessel UCS Defiance, you are cleared for docking at Petal 7. Welcome to the Nexus Station and the 143rd Grand Tournament." Jake acknowledged the transmission and ordered the pilot to proceed. Through the viewscreen they could see other ships much larger and more advanced than their own. The Zorathi vessels looked like floating cities made of black metal with weapon arrays that could destroy planets. The Vexi ships were transparent crystals that seemed to bend light around them. The Kethver bioships looked alive and moved like giant space whales. "We look pretty small next to those," Lisa observed while checking her notes about each species. The Zorathi had won the tournament for the last 8 centuries. They were masters of precision warfare and never made tactical mistakes. The Vexi used mathematics to predict every possible outcome and chose strategies with the highest success probability. The Kethver could adapt their biology in real time and communicate through a hive mind that made perfect coordination possible. The docking process took an hour because the station systems needed to adjust for human biology. The aliens had different atmospheric requirements and gravity preferences. Finally, the airlock connected and Jake led his team into the station. The corridor beyond was huge and filled with beings that looked like nothing from Earth. Tall insect-like creatures in flowing robes walked alongside crystalline entities that chimed like wind bells when they moved. Furry beast people with too many arms gestured wildly while talking to floating jellyfish covered in blinking lights. "Stay together and try not to stare," Jake told his team as they followed signs toward the registration area. Every alien they passed seemed to pause and look at the humans with expressions that ranged from curious to amused. The registration hall was enormous with hundreds of species present. Each delegation had a designated area marked by holographic symbols. Jake found the human section near the back where a single table waited with basic accommodations. A tall Zorathi official approached them. He had gray skin, 4 arms, and wore elaborate armor covered in metals. "Commander Morrison, I am High Commander Veltar of the Zorathi Empire. I will be your tournament coordinator." "Pleased to meet you," Jake replied and extended his hand. The alien looked at the gesture with confusion before awkwardly shaking it with one of his lower arms. "Your species is new to galactic civilization," Veltar continued. "The tournament committee has assigned you to preliminary bracket 9. You will compete against other recently discovered species for the right to advance to the main competition." Lisa checked her datapad. Bracket 9 has 12 species. "How many advance?" 2, Veltar replied with what might have been a smile. "The scenarios are basic military exercises: fortress siege, fleet engagement, and planetary assault. Each uses standard holographic simulation technology that creates perfect virtual environments. Safety protocols prevent actual death, but pain receptors remain active for realism." Sam looked up from his chess game. "What's the point of all this?" Veltar's expression grew serious. "The grand tournament determines galactic hierarchy for the next century. Winners receive territorial rights, trade preferences, and political influence. It prevents actual wars by channeling military competition into controlled environments." "So instead of fighting real wars, you play war games?" Jake said. "Precisely. The Zorothi have dominated through superior tactics and discipline. Other species excel in their own areas, but none match our military perfection, Veltar's tone suggested. He considered the outcome already decided. A chime sounded throughout the hall, and holographic displays appeared showing tournament brackets. The human delegation was listed at the bottom of the preliminary rounds with species names Jake couldn't pronounce. Your first match begins tomorrow, Veltar informed them. I suggest you use the time to familiarize yourselves with standard galactic military doctrine. The simulation systems are available for practice. After Veltar left, the human team gathered around their assigned table. Lisa spread out her research while Sam continued his chess game. Jake studied the tournament information and noticed something. Interesting. Look at this, he said, pointing to the rules document. They've been running the same basic scenarios for centuries. Same objectives, same victory conditions, same tactical approaches. Meaning what? Lisa asked. Meaning they're not really fighting wars, Jake replied. They're following scripts. Playing by rules that everyone already knows. Sam captured his opponent's queen and looked up. In chess, the best players don't just know the rules. They know when to break them. Jake smiled as he watched alien delegations celebrating their past victories and planning their familiar strategies. They had invited humanity to play their games without understanding one crucial fact about human nature. Humans had been playing war games for thousands of years. They just called them wars. Amy Collins adjusted her helmet and checked her weapon systems one final time. The holographic simulation chamber hummed around her as the fortress siege scenario loaded. She could feel the weight of her armor and smell the metallic tangled air, but she knew none of it was real. The simulation technology was so advanced that her brain couldn't tell the difference. Remember, team, this is just like the training runs, she spoke into her unit. Except our opponents actually know what they're doing. Her squad consisted of 12 Marines, all volunteers who had trained for months in virtual combat scenarios. They faced a Vexi defensive position built into a mountainside with overlapping fields of fire and multiple layers of barriers. According to standard galactic tactics, the proper approach involved heavy bombardment followed by coordinated assault waves, the Vexi. Defenders were crystalline beings who communicated through harmonic frequencies and calculated optimal defensive positions. Using advanced mathematics, their fortress was a masterpiece of geometric perfection with every angle designed to maximize defensive advantages while minimizing blind spots. Amy studied the tactical display and frowned. The standard approach would work eventually, but it would cost most of her force and take hours to complete. She noticed something interesting about the simulation parameters, though. The physics engine was incredibly detailed, modeling everything from gravity to atmospheric pressure to material stress tolerances. Johnson, what's the compressive strength of that rock face? She asked her demolitions expert. About 40,000 pounds per square inch, Captain. Why? Amy smiled and began issuing orders that would have horrified any Galactic Military Academy instructor. Instead of attacking the fortress directly, she ordered her team to target the mountain itself. The Vexi defenders watched in confusion, as human forces ignored their carefully prepared defensive positions and began placing charges in seemingly random locations around the mountain base. Their mathematical models had accounted for every possible assault vector except the one Amy was actually using. Fire in the hole, Johnson called out as the first set of charges detonated. The explosion sent shock waves through the rock formation, but the fortress remained intact. The Vexi commander felt vindicated in his defensive calculations until Amy's next phase began. Team 2, hit your marks, Amy ordered. More explosions followed, each one precisely timed and positioned. Amy wasn't trying to destroy the fortress directly. She was changing the fundamental geology of the mountainside. Stress fractures appeared in the rock face as the mountain's internal structure began to shift. Meanwhile, Rick Chen was having his own revelation in the aerial combat simulator. He faced a squadron of Kethver biofighters that could literally reshape themselves during flight. Their pilots were connected to their craft through neural links that allowed perfect coordination and instant adaptation to changing circumstances. Rick's human fighter was more primitive by comparison, but he had spent thousands of hours playing flight simulation games before joining the military. He approached the engagement like his favorite video game, looking for exploitable mechanics in the simulation's physics engine. The HFY formation attacked with perfect synchronization, their biofighters morphing into optimal configurations for each tactical situation. Rick responded by doing something no pilot in galactic history had ever attempted. He shut down his engines mid-flight and used the fighter's momentum to put it into a controlled tumble. The HFY pilots had no response programmed for such behavior because it violated every principle of aerial combat. Their formation broke apart as they tried to track it that was simultaneously falling, spinning, and accelerating in unpredictable directions. Rick restarted his engines at the last possible moment and emerged from his tumble, directly behind the enemy formation. His weapons fire caught 3 biofighters before they could adapt, and the psychological impact shattered their coordination completely. Back at the fortress siege, Amy's unconventional strategy reached its climax. The mountain trembled as internal stress reached critical levels. Cracks appeared in the fortress walls not from direct attack but from the foundation itself becoming unstable. "Impossible," the Vex High Commander transmitted. "Our calculations show the fortress can withstand any conventional assault." "Good thing this isn't conventional," Amy replied as she ordered the final charges detonated. The mountainside collapsed in a controlled avalanche that Amy had engineered through careful placement of explosives. The fortress tumbled into the valley below, its perfect defensive geometry becoming meaningless once separated from its foundation. Dr. Kate Williams watched both engagements from the observation deck while analyzing the alien responses. She was a xenopsychologist who specialized in understanding how different species approached conflict. What she saw fascinated her. "They're not adapting," she told Lisa Park. "The Vexi are recalculating their defensive matrices, but they're still using the same mathematical frameworks. The HFY are trying to evolve counters to Rick's maneuvers, but they're treating each action as a separate tactical problem, instead of recognizing the underlying strategy." Lisa nodded while reviewing the engagement data. "They're playing by rules that assume rational behavior. Amy and Rick are being deliberately irrational, so the aliens can't predict or counter their actions." The tournament judges reviewed the results with growing confusion. By every standard measurement, the humans had won their preliminary matches, but their methods defied classification. Amy's fortress siege violated basic principles of military engineering. Rick's aerial combat technique should have resulted in certain death. High Commander Veltar studied the recordings with several other senior officials. "The humans achieved victory through luck and primitive aggression," he concluded. "Their tactics are unsustainable against sophisticated opposition." But Kate Williams had identified something the aliens missed. During post-engagement interviews, she noticed that the Vexi defenders kept referring to what humans should have done. The HFY pilots expressed frustration that human behavior didn't follow logical patterns. "They're not just playing by rules," she explained to the human team during their debrief. "They're mentally incapable of thinking outside those rules. Their entire military doctrine is based on the assumption that optimal tactics exist for every situation." Jake Morrison processed this information while reviewing their next opponents. The preliminary brackets contained species with various specializations, but they all shared common assumptions about how warfare should be conducted. "So we keep doing the unexpected," he decided. "It's not just about being unexpected," Sam Rodriguez said while moving pieces on his chessboard. "It's about understanding that they're playing chess while we're playing poker." Amy Collins cleaned her simulated weapon and grinned. "I like poker better. More room for creativity." The human delegation prepared for their next matches with growing confidence. They had discovered something that would change the entire tournament. While the galaxy's greatest civilizations had spent centuries perfecting their military games, humanity had spent millennia learning that the deadliest weapon in any conflict was the willingness to change the rules their opponents were about to learn, that humans didn't just play to win. They played to survive, and survival had taught them that rules were just suggestions that other people followed. Don Murphy studied the campaign briefing with growing interest. The tournament had moved beyond simple tactical exercises into complex strategic scenarios that spanned multiple star systems and lasted weeks of simulated time. His assignment was to defend a colonial region against a Kethver invasion force that outnumbered his human forces 3-1. The Kethver were a hive mind species that could coordinate millions of individual units with perfect precision. Their bioships could adapt to any environment, and their ground forces evolved new capabilities during combat. Every galactic military academy taught that facing the Kethver required either overwhelming technological superiority or defensive positions strong enough to withstand endless waves of perfectly coordinated attacks. Don had neither advantage. His human forces were equipped with standard galactic military hardware and occupied defensive positions that the scenario parameters deemed adequate but not optimal. According to the strategic analysis computers, his chances of victory were less than 12%. "Looks like another impossible situation," Lisa Park commented while reviewing the tactical displays. "The Kethvar swarm doctrine has never been defeated by inferior numbers." "Good thing we're not trying to defeat it," Don replied. "We're going to make them defeat themselves." The campaign began with standard Kethver probing attacks designed to test human defensive capabilities. Don responded exactly as Galactic Doctrine prescribed, reinforcing weak points and establishing overlapping fields of fire. The alien observers nodded approvingly as human forces demonstrated competent but unremarkable defensive tactics. What they didn't notice was that Don was studying his opponents just as carefully as they were studying him. Each Kethver attack followed precise patterns based on the information gathered from previous engagements. Their hive mind processed data efficiently, but required time to analyze new information and distribute tactical updates throughout their forces. On the fourth day of the campaign, Don began implementing his real strategy. Instead of concentrating his forces in strong defensive positions, he scattered them across the entire operational area in small mobile units. Each unit operated independently with orders to engage Kethver forces briefly before withdrawing. To new positions, the Kethver responded by dividing their own forces to pursue the scattered human units. Their hive mind calculated optimal pursuit patterns and began coordinating complex multi-vector attacks designed to trap and destroy the mobile human forces. Don smiled as he watched. The alien formation spread across dozens of star systems. The Kethver were doing exactly what he wanted them to do. They were trying to be everywhere at once, which meant they were concentrated nowhere. Meanwhile, Jake Morrison was dealing with his own impossible scenario against the Vexhai. The crystalline beings had established a defensive perimeter around a critical supply depot using mathematical precision to create overlapping coverage that eliminated all possible approach vectors. Their calculations showed that any assault force would be detected and destroyed long before reaching their objectives. Jake's solution was typically human. Instead of trying to penetrate the defensive perimeter, he attacked the mathematics themselves. "We're going to make them recalculate everything," he explained to his staff. "Every time they solve for one variable, we're going to change 3 others." Human forces began conducting seemingly random operations throughout the star system. They attacked undefended positions, withdrew from advantageous ground, and made tactical decisions that violated every principle of military logic. Each action forced the Vexhai to update their calculations and adjust their defensive matrix. The Vexhai commanders grew increasingly frustrated as their perfect mathematical models became useless. Every time they achieved optimal positioning, human forces would do something unexpected that required complete recalculation of defensive parameters. "Their behavior is completely irrational," the Vexhai fleet commander reported. "They are making tactical decisions that serve no strategic purpose." What the aliens didn't understand was that Jake's seemingly random actions served a very specific purpose. Each operation gathered intelligence about Vex-High response patterns while forcing them to reveal the mathematical frameworks underlying their defensive calculations. Dr. Kate Williams monitored both campaigns from the command center. While analyzing alien psychological responses, she had identified a critical weakness in galactic military thinking that went beyond tactics or technology. "They're reacting instead of acting," she observed. "Dan is making the Kethver chase shadows while Jake is making the Vex-High solve puzzles." "That don't matter. Both species are so focused on responding optimally to human actions that they've forgotten about their own strategic objectives." The breakthrough came simultaneously in both campaigns. Dan's scattered forces had been gathering in predetermined positions while the Kethver chased decoy units across empty space. When the hive mind finally realized the deception, human forces had already concentrated for a devastating strike against the Kethver command structure. The beauty of Dan's strategy was that it exploited the Kethver's greatest strength. Their perfect coordination became a fatal weakness when their command nodes were eliminated, because the entire swarm lost the ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. Jake's campaign reached its climax when Vex-High defensive calculations finally reached an impossible contradiction. Their mathematical models could not account for human behavior patterns that seemed to follow no logical framework. While the crystalline beings struggled to resolve the computational paradox, human assault forces struck at positions the Vex-High had left undefended because their mathematics said no rational opponent would attack there. The galactic audience watched both victories with growing concern. Human tactics were not just unconventional, they were fundamentally incomprehensible. The methods that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia were proving useless against opponents who refused to follow established rules. High Commander Veltar called an emergency meeting of senior military officials from all major species. "The humans are using primitive tactics that should not work against sophisticated opposition," he insisted. "Their victories are statistical anomalies that will not continue against properly prepared defenses." But other voices were beginning to express doubt. Commander Zix of the Vex-High Crystalline Fleet had lost 2 consecutive engagements to human forces using mathematical frameworks that had never failed before. "Perhaps we are approaching this incorrectly," he suggested. "The humans may be operating according to strategic principles that we do not understand rather than using random tactics." "Impossible," Veltar replied. "They are a primitive species that has barely achieved interstellar travel. They cannot possess military knowledge superior to civilizations that have waged war for millions of years." Kate Williams smiled as she reviewed the recorded conversations between alien commanders. They were making the same mistake that human opponents had made throughout history. They were assuming that technological advancement automatically meant tactical superiority. "They're going to keep underestimating us until it's too late," she told Jake. "Every species in this tournament has forgotten something that humans never had the luxury of forgetting." "What's that?" Jake asked. "That war isn't about following rules or optimizing calculations or achieving perfect coordination," Kate replied. "War is about imposing your will on an opponent who doesn't want to cooperate. Everything else is just details." The human delegation prepared for the advanced rounds with quiet confidence. They had proven that creativity could overcome technology, that adaptability could defeat precision, and that psychological warfare was more powerful than mathematical perfection. Their opponents were about to learn that the galaxy's newest species had spent their entire evolutionary history mastering the one skill that mattered most in any conflict. Humans knew how to win when winning should be impossible. Ben Taylor stood before the holographic display showing a star system under siege. His mission was to defend civilian populations on 12 worlds while fighting a Zorathi fleet equipped with planet-killing weapons. The scenario parameters made victory impossible through conventional means. The Zorathi force was too large, too advanced, and too experienced for any reasonable defense to succeed. "Standard doctrine says we evacuate the civilians and conduct a fighting withdrawal," his aide reported. "Cut our losses and preserve military assets for future operations." Ben studied the population centers scattered across the 12 worlds. Millions of simulated civilians went about their daily lives, unaware that their fate was being decided in a military exercise. He made a decision that would horrify every war college instructor in the galaxy. "We're not evacuating anyone," he announced. "We're going to use the civilian populations as our primary strategic asset." The human officers in the command center exchanged uncertain glances. Using civilians in military operations violated every civilized rule of warfare. But Ben had identified something that the scenario designers had overlooked. The Zorethi were psychologically incapable of treating non-combatants as legitimate military targets. "Sir, that's against galactic warfare conventions," his operations officer pointed out. "Good thing this is a simulation and we're not bound by galactic conventions," Ben replied. "We're bound by human conventions, and humans fight to protect what matters most." Ben's strategy unfolded across multiple worlds simultaneously. Instead of concentrating military forces in traditional defensive positions, he dispersed them among civilian population centers. Human soldiers established command posts in schools, hospitals, and residential areas not to use civilians as shields, but to blur the distinction between military and civilian objectives. The Zorethi fleet arrived with overwhelming firepower and perfect tactical coordination. Their battle plans called for systematic destruction of military installations followed by bombardment of strategic targets. What they found instead was a defensive network that couldn't be attacked without causing massive civilian casualties. "The humans have placed military assets in civilian areas," the Zorethi fleet commander reported. "They are using non-combatants as human shields." "Incorrect," Ben responded on open communication channels. "We are using our military assets to protect civilian populations. There's a difference." Meanwhile, Susan Blake was demonstrating that human psychological warfare extended beyond the battlefield. Her assignment was to negotiate a complex treaty between 5 alien species with conflicting territorial claims. Standard diplomatic protocol required formal sessions, conducted according to established procedures that had worked for centuries. Susan ignored standard protocols completely. Instead of treating the negotiations as a political exercise, she approached them as psychological warfare against opponents who thought they understood human nature. "The key is understanding what each species really wants versus what they say they want," she explained to her diplomatic team. "The Vexi claim they want optimal resource allocation, but they actually want mathematical validation of their superiority. The Kethver say they need territory for expansion, but they really want security for their hive structures." Susan's breakthrough came when she realized that each alien species negotiated according to their biological and cultural programming. The Vexi made offers based on mathematical optimization. The Kethver sought collective agreements that strengthened group cohesion. The Zorethi demanded formal recognition of their military dominance instead of trying to find rational compromises between incompatible positions. Susan began manipulating the psychological frameworks that drove each species. She offered the Vexi solutions that appeared mathematically elegant even when they weren't actually optimal. She gave the Kethver agreements that satisfied their need for collective security while providing minimal actual benefits. She granted the Zorethi ceremonial recognition that cost nothing but appealed to their cultural pride. "You are manipulating our decision-making processes," the Vexi representative accused during one session. "I'm helping you find solutions that satisfy your real needs instead of your stated positions," Susan replied. "There's a difference." Back on the battlefield, Ben's unconventional defense was achieving impossible results. The Zorethi fleet found itself unable to use their superior firepower because every military target was intertwined with civilian infrastructure. Their tactical doctrine had no provisions for combat in such conditions. "This is not warfare," the Zorethi commander protested. "This is chaos." "This is war," Ben corrected. "Everything else is just organized violence between professional soldiers." The human defense network grew stronger as civilian populations began actively supporting military Operations. Factory workers produced equipment and supplies. Communication networks carried intelligence reports. Transportation systems moved troops and materials with efficiency that formal military logistics couldn't match. The Zorathi realized they were fighting not just human military forces, but an entire civilization mobilized for total war. Every civilian became a potential intelligence asset. Every building became a potential stronghold. Every street became a potential battlefield. The humans have militarized their entire society, the Zorathi tactical analyst reported. There are no purely civilian targets remaining. Wrong again, Ben replied. We haven't militarized our civilians. We've civilianized our military. Our soldiers aren't separate from the people they protect. They are the people they protect. Doctor. Kate Williams observed both operations while analyzing the psychological impact on alien forces. The tournament scenarios were designed to test military capabilities within established frameworks of civilized warfare. Human participants were operating outside those frameworks entirely. They're not just winning tactical engagements, she noted. They're changing the fundamental nature of what the aliens consider acceptable behavior in conflict situations. The breakthrough came when Zorathi forces began refusing orders to attack targets that contained civilian populations. Their cultural programming prevented them from conducting warfare against non-combatants, but human defensive strategies made it impossible to distinguish between military and civilian objectives. We cannot complete this mission without violating our most fundamental principles, the Zorathi fleet commander reported to his superiors. Meanwhile, Susan's negotiations concluded with agreements that satisfied all parties despite being completely contrary to their initial positions. Each species left the table convinced they had achieved their primary objectives, even though none of them had received what they originally demanded. How did you do that? Lisa Park asked after reviewing the final treaty documents. I gave them what they needed instead of what they wanted, Susan explained. Most conflicts aren't really about the stated issues. They're about psychological needs that the participants don't even recognize. The tournament judges faced an unprecedented situation. Human forces had achieved victory in scenarios designed to be unwinnable, but their methods challenged every assumption about acceptable conduct in military exercises. The humans are not following established rules of engagement, High Commander Veltar complained. Their tactics violate fundamental principles of civilized warfare. Which rules are they breaking? Jake Morrison asked. Show me the specific regulation that prohibits defending civilian populations or conducting effective negotiations. Veltar reviewed the tournament guidelines and found them frustratingly comprehensive but vague. The rules prohibited actual violence while allowing all forms of simulated combat. They required adherence to scenario parameters but didn't specify tactical limitations. They assumed participants would operate within established military frameworks but didn't mandate such behavior. The humans are technically within the rules, the chief tournament judge admitted. But they are violating the spirit of military competition. Maybe the spirit of military competition needs updating, Jake suggested. The human delegation advanced to the final rounds, having demonstrated that their approach to conflict transcended traditional military thinking. They had shown that warfare was not just about tactics and technology, but about psychology and society and the willingness to transform the nature of conflict itself. Their opponents were beginning to understand that they faced something unprecedented in galactic history. A species that treated every conflict as a matter of survival and approached survival with the creativity of people who had never known any other option. Alex Roberts faced the ultimate strategic scenario with calm determination. The final tournament challenge required him to command human forces against the combined might of the three most powerful galactic civilizations, the Zorathi brought military precision perfected over millennia. The Vexhai contributed mathematical certainty that had never failed. The Kethver offered biological adaptation that could counter any known strategy. Together, they represented everything the galaxy considered unbeatable. Separately, humanity had found ways to defeat each species, but the Alien Alliance had learned from those losses. They would not repeat their previous mistakes. The scenario spans 50 star systems over 5 years of simulated time, Lisa Park reported while reviewing the massive strategic display. We're outnumbered 1,000 to 1 in ships, 10,000 to 1 in ground forces, and 1,000,000 to 1 in total population. What are our advantages? Alex asked. According to the tactical computers, we don't have any, she replied. This scenario is designed to test strategic thinking under impossible conditions. The assumption is that participants will demonstrate leadership qualities while managing inevitable defeat. Alex smiled as he studied the holographic galaxy spread before him. 50 star systems glowed with the positions of alien fleets and fortress worlds. Trade routes connected industrial centers while defensive networks protected vital resources. It was a beautiful display of galactic civilization at its peak. They're right about one thing, he said. We can't win this scenario using conventional strategy. Rachel Stone had been assigned to manage economic warfare against opponents with established trade networks spanning centuries. The Alien Alliance controlled the galaxy's major industrial centers, financial institutions, and resource extraction facilities. Human economic power was negligible by comparison. Traditional economic theory says we should focus on niche markets and specialized services, she reported. Accept our position as a minor trading partner and try to build sustainable growth over decades. How long would that take to become competitive? Alex asked. Conservative estimates suggest 300 years minimum, Rachel replied. We don't have 300 years, Alex pointed out. We have 5 years to change the fundamental balance of galactic power. Rachel began implementing strategies that would have horrified any economics professor. Instead of trying to compete with established markets, she targeted the psychological foundations of galactic commerce. Human traders began offering deals that seemed too good to be true because they were too good to be true. We're selling advanced technology at prices below production cost, her aide pointed out. That's not sustainable. It's not supposed to be sustainable, Rachel replied. It's supposed to be disruptive. The human strategy was psychological rather than economic. By offering advanced technology at impossible prices, they forced alien traders to question the fundamental assumptions underlying galactic commerce. Were the humans desperate? Did they have access to unknown resources? Were they planning some kind of elaborate deception? Chris Anderson led special operations that operated in the gray areas between military action and creative problem-solving. His teams performed missions that existed at the edge of possibility, achieving objectives through methods that challenged the simulation's own logic. Remember, we're not trying to break the simulation, he told his operatives. We're trying to make the simulation break itself. Chris had identified something that the scenario designers hadn't considered. The holographic technology was so advanced that it modeled every aspect of reality, including psychological effects, social dynamics, and cultural responses. But the programmers were aliens who had made assumptions about how humans would behave, based on their understanding of other species. They programmed the simulation expecting us to act rationally, Chris explained. Every response algorithm is based on the assumption that we'll make logical decisions aimed at optimal outcomes. His special operations teams began conducting missions that made no tactical sense but served strategic purposes that the alien response algorithms couldn't process. They attacked heavily defended positions while ignoring vulnerable targets. They sabotaged their own supply lines while protecting enemy resources. They conducted operations that appeared to strengthen alien positions while actually undermining alien confidence. The Alien Alliance responded to these seemingly irrational actions by trying to understand the hidden logic behind human behavior. They diverted enormous resources to intelligence analysis and strategic planning designed to counter human objectives that didn't actually exist. The humans are conducting psychological warfare against our decision-making processes, the VexHi strategic analyst reported. Their actions appear random but must serve some mathematical framework that we do not understand. Impossible, High Commander Veltar replied. No species can sustain military operations without logical strategic planning. But the human campaign was achieving something unprecedented. Alex's forces were not winning battles in any conventional sense, but they were changing the fundamental nature of the conflict itself. The alien alliance found themselves fighting a war they didn't understand against an enemy, whose objectives remained incomprehensible. The breakthrough came when the three alien civilizations began working against each other while trying to counter human strategies. Zorthi demanded military responses to human provocations. The Vexai insisted on mathematical analysis of human behavior patterns. The Kethfor wanted to adapt their forces to counter human tactics. Each species' solution conflicted with the others, and their alliance began fracturing under the strain of trying to understand an opponent who operated outside their collective experience. The humans are using our strengths against us, the Kethfor collective mind reported. Our coordination becomes confusion when we cannot agree on the nature of the threat. Rachel's economic warfare reached its climax when galactic markets began questioning the fundamental value of everything. Human trade practices had introduced so much uncertainty into established systems that basic commercial relationships became unstable. They have destabilized the mathematical foundations of galactic commerce, the Vexai Economic Council reported. Our calculations no longer predict market behavior accurately. How is that possible? Their leadership demanded. The humans appear to be trading according to principles that prioritize psychological impact over profit optimization, came the reply. Their behavior violates every assumption underlying economic theory. Chris's special operations achieved their ultimate objective. When alien intelligence services became so focused on analyzing human behavior that they lost track of actual strategic developments, the simulation's response algorithms broke down when presented with patterns that didn't match any known military doctrine. The human strategy appears to be making us question our own strategic assumptions, the Zorathi intelligence chief reported. They are waging war against our ability to understand warfare itself. Alex watched the strategic display as alien forces across 50 star systems became increasingly paralyzed by their inability to comprehend human objectives. The alien alliance had superior technology, overwhelming numbers, and perfect coordination, but they were losing the will to use their advantages effectively. They're starting to doubt themselves, Kate Williams observed. Each species is questioning whether their traditional approaches are adequate for dealing with human psychology. That's the point, Alex replied. We're not trying to beat them at their own game. We're trying to make them forget how to play. The final phase of the campaign began when the alien alliance started making strategic errors born of uncertainty rather than ignorance. Their perfect coordination broke down as each species second-guessed their traditional responses and searched for hidden meanings in human actions that contained no deeper purpose than confusion itself. Human forces across the galaxy prepared for the endgame with quiet confidence. They had proven that the greatest advantage in any conflict was not superior firepower or advanced technology, but the psychological willingness to operate outside the boundaries of conventional thinking. Their opponents were about to learn that humans had never accepted the assumption that warfare had rules that couldn't be changed. Jake Morrison stood before the assembled Galactic Council as the final simulation reached its unprecedented conclusion. The holographic displays showed a strategic situation that defied every military theory in the galaxy. Human forces were outnumbered, outgunned, and operating with inferior technology, yet somehow the alien alliance had lost the initiative completely. The scenario parameters indicate that humanity should have been eliminated within the first 6 months, High Commander Veltar announced to the assembly. Your forces control less than 3% of strategic resources and have won fewer than 12% of tactical engagements. Yet you have achieved total strategic victory, the Vexai representative added with crystalline confusion. Our mathematical models cannot account for this outcome. Jake looked across the assembly hall filled with representatives from dozens of galactic civilizations. Their expressions ranged from bewilderment to concern to something approaching fear. They had witnessed something that challenged their fundamental understanding of conflict itself. "You invited us to participate in war games," Jake said calmly. "But you made a critical assumption about human nature." "What assumption?" Veltar demanded. "You assumed we were playing." The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Alien delegates shifted uncomfortably as the implications began to register. The tournament scenarios had been sophisticated. Military exercises designed to test strategic thinking within established parameters. But humans had approached every challenge as a matter of species survival. Alex Roberts stepped forward to address the military representatives specifically. "Every scenario you presented was based on the idea that warfare has rules that rational participants will follow. Optimal tactics, acceptable losses, strategic objectives that justify the means used to achieve them. Those principles have maintained galactic peace for millennia," the HFY War Council leader protested. "Civilized conflict requires agreed-upon limitations." "Civilized conflict is a contradiction in terms," Alex replied. "When survival is at stake, the only rule that matters is winning. Everything else is luxury that only dominant species can afford." Dr. Kate Williams provided the psychological analysis that the alien delegates needed to understand what they had witnessed. "Each of your species approaches conflict from a position of strength. The Zorthi have never faced extinction. The Vexi have always possessed technological superiority. The Kethver have numbers and adaptability that ensure survival. Humans have none of those advantages," she continued. "We evolved on a world where everything tried to kill us, competing with predators that were stronger, faster, and better adapted than we were. Our survival strategy was never based on being the best at anything. It was based on being willing to do whatever worked." The tournament judges reviewed the scenario data with growing understanding. Human tactics had violated established military doctrine not because they were primitive, but because they were desperate. Every engagement had been approached with the psychological intensity of a life-or-death struggle. "You treated simulated conflicts as real wars," the chief judge observed. "From our perspective, they were real wars," Jake replied. "The stakes might have been different, but the mindset was identical. When humans fight, we fight for keeps." Letha Park presented the strategic analysis that explained how human forces had achieved impossible victories. "Your war games assume that participants will optimize for declared objectives within established parameters. Humans optimized for psychological dominance regardless of the stated rules. Amy Collins didn't just defeat the Vexi fortress," she explained. "She made them question whether their mathematical certainty could account for human creativity. Don Murphy didn't just outmaneuver the Kethver swarm. He made them doubt whether perfect coordination could counter human unpredictability. Every human victory was designed to undermine alien confidence in their own strategic assumptions," Lisa continued. "We weren't trying to win battles, we were trying to win the war for your minds." The alien alliance that had formed to counter human advancement found themselves facing a more fundamental question. If their combined military might could be neutralized by psychological tactics and unconventional thinking, what did that mean for galactic stability? "The humans have changed the nature of conflict itself," the Kethver Collective Mind reported. "Their methods cannot be countered by traditional approaches because they operate outside traditional frameworks entirely." Sam Rodriguez, who had been quietly playing chess throughout the proceedings, finally spoke up. "In chess, both players follow the same rules and try to optimize their position according to established principles. But humans didn't learn strategy. From chess, we learned it from poker. What is the difference?" the Vexi representative asked. "In poker, the cards you hold matter less than your ability to make your opponent believe you hold better cards," Sam explained. "Deception, psychological pressure, and the willingness to risk everything on uncertain outcomes become more important than mathematical optimization. The galaxy has been playing chess for millions of years," he continued. "You've all gotten very good at it. But humans have been playing poker for our entire evolutionary history, and poker is the better preparation for real conflict." The Galactic Council faced a decision that would reshape interstellar relations permanently. The tournament results could not be disputed. But accepting them meant acknowledging that humanity possessed strategic capabilities that challenged the existing order. "What do you want?" Veltar asked finally. "Recognition as equals," Jake replied. "Not because we're technologically advanced or numerically superior or perfectly coordinated, but because we understand something about conflict that you've forgotten." "Which is what?" "That the most dangerous opponent is not the one with the best weapons or the largest army or the most sophisticated tactics," Jake said. "It's the one with nothing left to lose and the creativity to turn any situation into an opportunity." The final vote was closer than anyone expected, but humanity gained recognition as a major galactic power, not through conquest or technological achievement, but through demonstrating that they approached conflict from a fundamentally different perspective than any other known species. The ceremony concluded with the signing of new galactic accords that granted humanity equal status among the great civilizations. But the real victory was not political recognition. It was the knowledge that spreading throughout the galaxy that human nature itself was a strategic weapon. As the delegates departed, High Commander Veltar approached Jake with a mixture of respect and wariness. "Your species has proven that you are formidable opponents," he admitted. "But what assurance do we have that you will not use these capabilities against peaceful civilizations?" Jake smiled and gestured toward the tournament displays that showed human forces protecting civilian populations and conducting defensive operations. "We never started a fight in any of these scenarios, we just finished them. The question you should be asking," he continued, "is not whether humanity will use our capabilities for aggression. The question is whether you want us as allies when you face an opponent who shares our willingness to fight for survival." The galactic representatives departed with new understanding of humanity's place in the cosmos. They had invited a primitive species to participate in sophisticated military exercises and discovered that primitiveness was a matter of perspective. Humans had spent their entire evolutionary history learning that survival required the willingness to change the rules when the rules no longer served their purpose. They had brought that lesson to the galaxy's greatest military competition and proven that the deadliest weapon in any conflict was not technology or numbers or coordination. It was the refusal to accept that anything was impossible when everything that mattered was at stake. The galaxy would never be quite the same. Word would spread that humanity approached conflict not as a game with established rules but as an existential challenge that required whatever means were necessary for victory. Some species would seek human alliance for protection. Others would avoid human contact out of caution. But all would remember that they had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that played for keeps in a universe that had forgotten what that meant.